Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. On this week's show, we're looking at the darker side of history in Lewes, Delaware. Make sure all of the lights are on because the 302 is about to tell you some spine-tingling stories. Hey there, we are at the Lewes Historical Society complex on Ship Carpenter Street, and we're talking about that part of history that gives you goosebumps. I'm joined now by Scott Lackman. Now, Scott, you are a volunteer historian with a specialty in this area, right?
That's correct, I am, yes.
So tell us a little bit about Lewes Legends. Where did the idea come from, and what's it all about?
Legends is all about real history of Lewes, Delaware. This town is loaded with history. But then again, sometimes it has a little dark side. And that dark side just may come through into a little bit of a legend. Kind of gives you goosebumps.
Definitely. Now you have a story that you're going to tell us about the house that's right behind us.
Yes, I do. Yeah, that house was actually in town, but it was moved here later on onto our campus. But what happened was Mr. James Wiley owned that home. And his wife was having a torrid affair with a young doctor, Dr. Wilson. And Theodore Wilson and Mr. Wiley's young wife for years went on with this affair. Now the people in Lewes, this is back in the 1700s, they didn't like this. And they kept trying to get Mr. Wiley to put an end to this affair because it was embarrassing the town. So what happened was they had a meeting one time. They had it under the ruse of a Masonic meeting at the Masonic Temple in Lewes. So they had the young doctor there. They were trying to get the doctor to come clean and stop messing around. Well, they were talking to him, and all of a sudden, out of the shadows comes Mr. Wiley. And he walks up behind the young doctor, pulls out a pistol, and fires. And actually blows the man's brains out.
Oh my goodness.
He was arrested, naturally, and he was put in jail. Now the jail is up the street here. It's actually now an ice cream shop. People don't know that, but that's what it was. He was found guilty, and he was going to be put to death. But he stayed in the jail, and he stayed there. And while he was in there, he actually developed tuberculosis. Now, Mr. Wiley was a tavern owner. He had lost his wife, he had lost his business, he had lost his money, he had lost everything. Very, very sad state of affairs. But the governor of the state later on had a soft spot in his heart for crimes of passion. So he actually released him after he was found guilty, because he was supposed to hang by the neck until dead. So he was out moving around Lewes, didn't have much, he was drinking. And what happened was, he was actually at a meeting one night, and they were all talking around a fire, and out of the shadows again comes another man. His name was James Patriot Wilson, the older brother of young Dr. Theodore Wilson. He came up behind James Wiley, put a pistol in his head, pulled the trigger, flash in the pan. They dragged him out. James Patriot Wilson was dragged out of there, and they said, "What are you trying to do? Turn Lewes into a murderous town?" He said, "At least I tried." A couple of years later, James Patriot Wilson was actually made head of the First Presbyterian Church over on Kings Highway in Lewes. And a couple of years after that, he was promoted to Philadelphia in charge of the First Presbyterian Church. James Wiley survived that and later passed away. Well, over in this house is where he actually lived during all that. We go into this house now, we hear strange noises. We do a thing called tavern talks every once in a while. And We were doing a show. The Tavern Talks is historical reenactments of real history. And we heard noises, banging on the door. There was nobody there during our show. We've heard footsteps upstairs during the tours when nobody's up there. Sounds like somebody dragging furniture across there. The scary part is we had some ghost finders come into the property. They had everything all hooked up in the back part of the room. All of a sudden, they said, there's nothing here, we're not getting anything. One person said, let's go up to the 3rd floor.
Oh, there you go.
That's where it really happened. A booming voice came out of the 3rd floor and said, no, James is up here. They scattered up to see if anybody was there. Not a soul, just the voice. But there are times we come by and we look at that house. Sometimes the shades are moved. Sometimes we go into the home, things are moved around a little bit. You can hear some eerie creakiness. That's the legends part. Is he really there or not? We don't know.
We're going to have to come and check it out.
You will have to.
But that's not the only spooky story that you have to tell on Lewes Legends. And when we return, we're going to hear a little bit more. We'll be right back.
I'm Amelia Wiggins at the Delaware Art Museum. Be inspired by the 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about the spookier side of history here in Lewes, Delaware, and I'm joined by Scott Lackman, who is a volunteer historian. This must be really interesting for you. I mean, going over history in general is always fascinating, but this is kind of like the CSI or the, whodunit aspect of history, but basically whodunit because of all these historical records, right?
We do have a lot of records in town, and we have people that research it. I look a little bit, but yeah, there's definite records. We know who was having drinks at a tavern, during what time, how much they were buying. It was crazy, how much it cost, everything.
That's amazing. Now, the next story you're going to tell us is about the Susan Johnson murder that happened just up the street. Is that right?
About a block up the street, yeah, in the Rives Holt house.
So what happened?
Well, Rives Holt, actually, the house is the oldest house in Delaware on its original foundation. It was built in 1665.
Wow.
It's an old place. And a lot of different people lived there over the years. Now, one was Jacob Jones, who was actually a military naval war hero during the War of 1812, and he lived there during the Revolution. But a little bit earlier than that, in the 1600s, something happened in that house. We think it was that house. There was a young lady in town named Susan Johnson, and she was married to a sailor. And somebody went over to her home one day. She lived, I believe, just a couple blocks away from there. And they found her laying on the floor at the base of some stairs, dead, with bruises all over her neck, her shoulder. So they figured out what's going on. So they had some people come in and look at her, and they said, looks like she was hit with a monkey fist.
Now, what is a monkey fist?
A monkey fist is a hard ball of rope, very hard ball of rope, and it has a loop on it. It's usually tied to a string on a ship. So if the string got loose and went up through the sails, it wouldn't unravel the whole sail. That's what a monkey fist is. Now, her husband was a sailor with the Royal Navy. So they said, maybe it was him. So they arrested him. Now, the interesting part is they had to have a trial. So they got a jury together. Now, this woman was murdered, so at least they think she was. So what they did was they said, we have to have the jury look at the body. This is the 1600s. Nobody wants to look, men wants to look at a nude body of a woman. So what they did, and this is the first time our records show that an all-woman jury was actually selected in our country.
Really? That's amazing.
All-woman jury, because men didn't want to look at a nude body.
Sure.
Now the question was, where are they going to look at this body? They can't look at it in church. They can't look at it at City Hall. Let's look at it in a tavern. The Rives old house was a tavern. Now, was that the tavern they actually examined the body? We don't know. We're not sure. But what happened was they had the whole trial. They found her husband guilty. And he was, then all of a sudden some people said, wait a minute. They had a second talk about it. And they said, he can't be guilty because there's no proof that he actually did this. So they set him free, and he just disappeared somewhere off into the sunset. Now here's this woman that died. Of course, they buried her. Off she goes. Well, they said that those might have come from a monkey fist. It might have been something else instead of him actually killing her. Well, years and years go by. Things got moved around in that home. People said they saw apparitions occasionally. Now, again, those same ghost finders were down in the basement, and they were asking about Susan because of the records. Susan, are you here? They heard some crackling on their machines and some of their things, and all of a sudden they said, Susan, how did you die? And they heard a voice say 3 words. It was a woman's voice. The same word 3 times. Pushed. 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 And then, be gone. Be gone. Be gone. She was laying at the bottom of the stairs, wasn't she? Yeah. So was she murdered or not? We don't know. Was that the tavern? We're not sure. But that's where real history meets legends in Lewes.
So to hear pushed, that's gotta really send chills down your spine.
It does, and sometimes when we actually go down in the basement, it does send some chills down your spine.
But it's also kind of exciting at the same time. Do you ever find yourself thinking, oh, there's a noise, that must be Susan?
It could be, yes, it could be, definitely. But am I still a skeptic? Well, I kind of am a skeptic. But then again, there's things that I've heard and things that I've seen that can't be explained.
I can imagine that's one of the perks of the job, to explore the unexplainable.
That's one of the perks. The other perks of the job is being able to really put out real history about Lewes, Delaware, because there's so much here. It's so rich with history. We just love it.
There certainly is. And we have one more story to share with you when we return.
Hi, this is Bill Petroni from Extreme Zone in Newcastle, Delaware, and I love racing with the 302.
Welcome back. We're in Lewes, Delaware, and we're hearing a lot of spine-tingling tales that you can check out when you come to check out the Lewes Legends Tour. I'm joined by Scott Lackman. Now, there is one story that you're going to tell us about a gentleman by the name of Henry McCracken.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Henry was a river and bay pilot here in town. He and his father lived here in town, and they would guide ships up and down the Delaware, up to Philadelphia, because of all the sandbars and shoals. It's very dangerous. To this day, they still do that. But Henry was out on his ship one day, and this is kind of a fun story. He was on his ship one day, and a storm came in. It was a horrible storm, and his ship is pitching, and it's rolling, and it's going all over the place. And he says, please, and he dropped the anchor, be my lucky anchor, save my ship, save this. So he actually went down, dropped that anchor, and it righted the ship. And the ship settled down, the storm went away. From that time on, he called it his lucky anchor. Now, he passed away years ago, and he's buried up the street here in St. Peter's Cemetery. All the way up to the left, his grave is right by the front of the church. And next to his grave is buried a very large anchor, his lucky anchor. Now, the fluke of the anchor sticks out of the ground about this much. If you find that fluke and you rub it with your hands, you're guaranteed to have many years of good luck.
Now, I took the tour not too long ago, and you would be amazed at the number of people that actually go up and touch the fluke that's jutting out of the ground. And it's really a beautiful cemetery.
It is. Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. It goes way back, and there's so much history on it. If you're in there and you go into our website and you look up the graves in there, they're numbered. And they're numbered up there, and you can see who's buried where and a little history on those people.
So I got to ask you, we've been talking about murders. How did Mr. McCracken die? Was it old age? Or?
Old age, yes.
Okay, well, so he got off easy, I guess.
Yes, he did.
In terms of the legends go. But you have others. A gentleman by the name of French?
French, the Turkish sailor, he was actually here in the 1600s. And French was an interesting person. He was Turkish, but he spoke French, and nobody could understand what he was saying. And he was actually a sailor who swam ashore. And the local Native Americans got a hold of him, and they brought him into Lewes. Now, this is the 1600s, and they couldn't understand what he was saying. Nobody could. So they gave him to an Englishman, and the Englishman deemed him as a slave. And they took him over to Maryland. And on the way over to Maryland, he escaped and came back into Lewes. But he was recaptured again. And they brought him back out into Maryland again to the person that actually bought him. He escaped again, but this time he put some hurt on the people that were there. He really hurt them badly. So he came into Lewes again, hoping to get a ship out of here because this was a big shipping destination. Well, he was hiding. They caught him again. And because he put a lot of hurt on these people, he really hurt some people, they took him up to Philadelphia and they put him on trial. And just to show that he should not do that to his owners, they deemed that he's going to hang by the neck until dead. So they brought him back down to Lewes, where up our creek, just a ways, on an old tree, they hung French, the Turkish sailor. He hung there for a few days. When they cut the body down, they cut off his head and put it on a spike right by the water. And it stood there for a couple months. The reason why is to show that don't ever cross the owners. Don't ever cross that. After a while, they took his head and they just threw it into the creek. Well, they say that during a full moon in the middle of October, if you're walking down by the creek, you just may see French walking along the creekside looking for his head. Some people actually, to this day, sometimes they see a little apparition down there. I've never seen it, but again, that's the legend part, looking for his head. But his head really was put on a spike and thrown into the creek. That's a little bit of the dark side of Lewes.
Sure. And I can imagine going through the documents and things, the way that they would describe this. I mean, this was a horrific thing. Oh,
it was horrible. It was horrible. That, just to have, a head on a spike. Could you imagine? Could you imagine that? People walking by there. It's a message. That's how they sent messages in those days, I guess. Just behave and make sure that you don't cross the owners.
So if someone wants to come, because there are so many more stories in this collection, in this tour. So when do you guys do the tour? And
well, our tours, like the Legends tour, is done usually from April into October. And matter of fact, in October we say you should bring a flashlight because the end of the tour is done in the dark. It's a little scary.
Sure.
But we do a lot of tours, and to find out what tours we do, you can go on to historiclewes.org, right online, and you can see all the tours and all the lineups that we have. We do that. I mentioned earlier, we do tavern talks, historical interpretations. We have days in here like the first weekend of December. We're going to be in these grounds here with carolers, and it's just going to be fun with a bonfire and people dressed in clothing and talking history. It's just so much fun. Lots of things to do in Lewes, especially with the Lewes Historical Society.
Yeah, and this is the starting point. Something happened year-round, so just check out the website.
Absolutely.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for sharing stories with us. I certainly appreciate, as do our viewers.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. information on Lewes legends, visit historiclewes.org. That'll do it for this week's episode. We're going to leave you now with a beauty shot from Mary Vessels Park. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on the 302.